And we welcome you to Fantasy Football Today, presented by BetMGM, the sportsbook born in Vegas. Welcome to our special waiver wire edition here on CBS Sports Network. Adam Azer, Dave Richard, Jamie Eisenberg. Guys, I've been doing all my waiver claims. Honestly, not too many. Some estimates in there, but not going crazy for any wide receivers. But do you know what the most difficult decision that I have to make this week in terms of waivers? I'm going to tell you what it is because you don't know. You have no idea. Why would you know? Do I drop the Chargers DST? What would you guys do? The Chargers DST, one of the best. They got the Bengals and the Ravens coming up. We got the Texans out there. We got the Dolphins out there. We didn't talk about this on the hour-long show we did this morning, guys. Should we drop or keep the Chargers DST?
I would drop them. Those two matchups, they scare me. The Bengals offense has been rolling. The Ravens offense has been rolling. I know the Chargers have a good defense. This isn't to slight them. It's about how many sacks can they get, how many points can they hold them to, how many turnovers can they get. I'd rather go in a different direction. The Texans make sense. So do the Packers taking on Chicago.
So you're talking about not using them in Week 11. I don't think anybody's going to use them against the Bengals. Not using them in Week 12. Nobody's going to use them against the Ravens. By Week 13, you probably have a few fantasy managers not paying attention, heading to the fantasy playoffs. Think you have a better chance to get them back then as opposed to trying to carry them now. So I would drop them and pick them up.
I don't even know if you'd want to use. They play at Atlanta after that. It's not a layup.
It's true.
It is true.
Yeah. All right. It's tough. I haven't really checked, but are they the number one DST? They might be. We'll get back to you on that. Anyway, welcome. Hope everybody had a great Week 10. And look, we've got 4 teams on bye. No Baker Mayfield, no Kyler Murray, no Chuba Hubbard. Obviously, a lot of really good players that are out this week, so let's give you some help on the waiver wire. Before we do that, though, a dud of a game last night. The Dolphins, I was working on a stupid nickname for them, the Miami Dink and Dunk Fins. That was the best I could do. We'll work on it, but that's all
Hopefully
they do.
Hopefully you didn't work that hard on it.
3 hours to come up with that. But what were your big takeaways, Dave, from the Miami Dink and Dunk Fins and the Los Angeles scams? Because they scammed us into thinking.
The scams is a good one, but the Dink and Dunk Fins, I can't believe I just repeated it. That's bad, as bad as you made it sound. Listen, I think the offense is kind of a mess right now. Their defense is what won them that game. Tyreek Hill just really hasn't looked like himself since Week 1, and now we know that the wrist is part of it, and we know that Tua Tagovailoa is starting to find shorter targets. Jonnu Smith, early on in the game, it was Jalen Waddle. I was thinking this was going to be a huge game for Jalen Waddle. 55 yards on the first drive, 57 yards for the rest of the game. The only player that is a must start in Miami is Devon Achane. You're still going to start Tyreek Hill as a number 2 wide receiver, but you might find some other players that you'd start ahead of him if you're loaded at wide receiver, and I think Jalen Waddle is at best a flex moving forward.
And then here come the Raiders. And all the Dolphins are going to be in your starting lineup. I mean, it's just, this is the week that they hopefully go off. It's been, I think we didn't at the time. I think we do realize it now how good this Arizona defense is. Tua's first game back. That was a tough game. Buffalo, tough game. I thought they actually played better against the Bills than they did against the Rams. And then I don't know what happens to this Dolphins team in primetime. They do not, under Mike McDaniel with Tua, play well in primetime. So I'm hoping that's the case. But yes, there are some things that are just evident right now. The offensive line's a mess. Tyreek Hill's banged up. But I do think coming back home, playing the Raiders, this is a chance for them to get right. Then maybe if they do, you sell Tyreek Hill, you sell Tua, you sell Jalen Waddle if he has a good game. Devon Achane, I agree, is the safest and best of the Dolphins' skill position players at this point. But both defenses were not playing well prior to this, and both defenses played well. What does that say? Probably just a bad night for both offenses.
Probably.
Yeah. But the Malik Washington touchdown, come on. I just hate that. It's just, that shouldn't happen. We don't like it. All right, let's talk about some buy lows and some sell highs here. Our favorite buy lows.
Just Jamie, skip over the Rams.
Yeah, but we don't need to talk about the Rams. What's to say about the Rams? Nothing, right? Sure.
All right. Sorry, we're on a schedule, but that's okay.
Let's talk about your DST problems for 20 minutes and skip over the Rams.
Let's do who has more. Who has more fantasy points this week? Matthew Stafford or Bo Nix?
I'll take Bo Nix.
I will too.
Yeah, all right. Let's talk about the Rams. I was honestly just testing you because you always skip over the Rams. So I was like, let's see if they actually remember the Rams. They remember this time. But the scams, Jamie, any concerns about Kyren Williams? A little bit of a rough stretch for him.
No, still getting 15 to 20 touches per game. Still playing 86% plus of the snaps. I do want to roster Blake Corum because, Kyron, his injury track record hopefully doesn't show up again this year. So that the guy behind Williams is going to get a lot of work potentially, and that's Corum right now. Stafford is really the one you got to worry about because you're starting Puka Nacua, you're starting Cooper Kupp. Their numbers have been consistent, aside from Punchin Nacua getting ejected 2 games ago. I think when you just look at these guys right now, can they get the touchdowns? And that's the issue. Kupp has found the end zone, Puka has not. The Patriots defense, one of these guys is going to get Christian Gonzalez. I don't think that matters because of how they move and how they're going to get, scheme to get open. You can't take away both. So one guy may have a big game, one guy may have a mediocre game. But given the landscape of receivers this week, you're starting both. Deeper leagues, we might have a new tight end for the Rams. Davis Allen coming off a 5-catch game. That's something to look at. But really at this point, it's about Stafford. Can you trust him? And I would say probably not going into week 11. And then the case of the other 3 skill position players, they're must-start guys.
I do wonder if that offensive line can get its act together against the Patriots. And I know the Patriots had 9 sacks against Chicago last week, but that's Chicago. It's the worst offensive line that I think lined up in a game this year. And the Rams offensive line on paper should be one of the better units in the league. So I actually might buy into Stafford a little bit. Let's call him a bye-week replacement quarterback, not a top 12 guy. I will start Bo Nix ahead of him. But if he's got time to throw, that he's going to connect with Nacua, Kupp, Allen, the guys that you talked about, and Kyron Williams should have a good day as well against the Patriots.
Yeah, I don't think Stafford's a sit. I just don't think the upside is there like we were hoping for after the first game with Puka back and Kupp back because that was amazing.
Right.
And then it was, okay, Nacua gets tossed. He gets the safety touchdown to save his numbers in overtime against DeMarcus Robinson, who's also somebody that you can't really trust right now.
Nope.
But yeah, I think Stafford's still a low-end starter. He's just not a must-start guy like we were saying, top 10 quarterback.
Right. Like I thought he had tons of upside in this game, Adam. Last night against Miami, he didn't have it. I don't think he's going to have it this week against New England either.
Okay. Well, guys, because we talked about the Rams, we're out of time for today to punt the entire waiver wire show.
No, who has more?
What's the laugh at these cheesy jokes? Favorite buy low. All right, Jamie, you say buy low on DeAndre Swift. Dave says buy low on Josh Jacobs. Go ahead, Jamie.
You got a coordinator change, and Swift is coming off a down game. So Dave mentioned it. The offensive line has been a disaster. Hopefully the line will start to get healthy. We saw what Swift was doing basically from week 3 on. He got off to a sluggish start, then really turned things up. He's had some games where he's been involved in the passing game. But Thomas Brown, as the play caller now, is a offensive coordinator that likes to use his run game. And I think we'll see DeAndre Swift be the focal point of the offense once again. He will take pressure off of Caleb Williams. Whenever you get a player that was doing well, coming off a bad game, and certainly has offensive line concerns that everybody's talking about, you can say, okay, maybe DeAndre Swift's in a bad spot. I had somebody text me, is DeAndre Swift startable the rest of the season after his game? I was like, of course he is. You're looking at what he's been doing and how healthy he's currently is, thankfully. If people are willing to punt on him for, somebody who's in a bad spot, in a good spot coming off a game that is not necessarily sustainable, I'm looking to acquire DeAndre Swift.
Was the person who texted you Thomas Brown?
No,
not quite, right?
No.
All right, Josh Jacobs in Green Bay taking on Chicago next week. Look, here's what I love about Jacobs. 15 or more touches in all but one game this year, 20-plus PPR points in 2 of his past 3 games, and he's coming off of a bye, and I think he's valued right now as like a low-end number 2 fantasy running back. I love his schedule rest of season. It's a top 10 schedule, and I think Green Bay can lean on. I do. I think that Green Bay can lean on Josh Jacobs, and I think that he can be the reason why they make a playoff push. So I like Jacobs as someone that you can buy low-ish on and still get good return. You're not going to be able to get him dirt cheap, but I bet you'll be able, if you're going to go running back shopping, shop for both Swift and Jacobs and see which player you can give up less for and then acquire that player.
All right, how about some sell highs? Dave, we'll start with you with Kyler Murray. Yeah. Jamie has Drake London as a sell high, which is interesting. And go ahead, Dave, on Kyler.
Anytime Kyler Murray has a monster game with multiple rushing touchdowns, I've got to throw the sell high flag up. And I want to see if there's somebody who's just been struggling at quarterback, or maybe a team that's been contending, but they don't have a stud quarterback, that'll pony up a lot to get Kyler Murray. I know as a fantasy manager, I can usually go to my waiver wire, find a quarterback if I'm trading my stud, get a player at a different position in return. That bolsters my lineup in 2 ways. Number 1, I've got a player at a different position who I can start and feel good about. Number 2, the quarterbacks off the waiver wire this week aren't that bad. We'll talk about them. And Kyler Murray, I think you'll get more for him now than you could have a week ago. And I think you could potentially sell him off as a top 5 fantasy quarterback.
So in the case of Drake London, I'm only selling him for a superstar. So the one player that comes to mind that I might be able to get for Drake London would be Nico Collins. And so Collins coming back, already past his bye week, hopefully healthy, good to go rest of season. You look at Drake London's next 3 weeks. Denver this week, going to be a little bit of a challenge. He may come through without any issues, but it's going to be difficult if he gets Surtain. Bye in week 12, Chargers in week 13. So this is not the easiest 3-game stretch for him, knowing that you can't use him for one of those weeks. So based on how he's had this season, obviously I was big on Drake London coming into the year. I'm not giving up on Drake London by any stretch. But just looking at the next 3 weeks, it may not be the best stretch of production for him. And if I could turn him into another superstar, I'm trying to make that trade.
How about Tyreek Hill, CeeDee Lamb, or Malik Neighbors?
I would not do it for Hill or Lamb at this point. I would consider it for Neighbors.
I think I'd take London ahead of all 3 of those receivers in full PPR.
Yeah, that's a tough call. I mean, I think especially for Neighbors. I assume Neighbors is tougher. I see Neighbors is ahead of Hill and Lamb for you guys?
At this point, yes. But again, I wouldn't make that trade. That's the only one I would consider. You gotta figure out who Neighbors' quarterback is coming off their bye.
No. Someone has to figure that out. The Brian Dable's got to figure that out. Or is it ownership? All right, the top 3 waiver wire priorities. That's what we're here for, right? We got to get some guys. I've put in claims for Estime in most of my leagues. I don't know that I want to tell Dave and Jamie the bid I put in for Estime because I think we're in the same league. But whatever. I think I put in like a $24-ish bid for him. I had about $35, $36 left. So that's definitely going to be the highest bid I put in for anyone this week, unless I saw someone like Cedric Tillman on the waiver wire, which I don't. But who are, Jamie, your top 3 waiver wire priorities?
It's all 3 running backs. It's Audric Estime, it's Gus Edwards, and it's Cam Akers. You know, we've been saying for the last basically 2-3 weeks that there haven't been running backs that you can look at and say, maybe this guy can help me. And in the case of all 3 of these guys, they might be able to help you this week in certain situations, and they certainly might be able to help you long term. Estime looks like the starting running back for the Broncos for the foreseeable future. Just had 14 carries, only 53 yards, but it was a tough matchup against Kansas City. You just have to factor in Javonte Williams and Jaleel McLaughlin still healthy. Gus Edwards is playing in tandem with J.K. Dobbins. First came back after a 4-game absence with an ankle injury. 10 carries, 55 yards. You know this team wants to run the ball. J.K. Dobbins has now set a career high, a season high in carries for his career. Last time he had this many carries was his rookie season. So will he be able to hold up? If not, Gus Edwards could be the feature back for the Chargers. We know that's a pretty good spot to be in. And then Cam Akers may be the best of this trio simply because if Aaron Jones misses the game against Tennessee, we're going to start him ahead of Estime and start him ahead of Gus Edwards. So you want to pick up one of these running backs. The receivers, there's a lot of mixing and matching that could go on. Injuries are going to play a factor here. Dave mentioned there's a lot of quarterbacks. There is one tight end in Dawson Knox that might be a featured option if there is no Dalton Kincaid. But again, you're waiting on an if there. So I think the running backs make the most sense as the top 3 guys.
I love Estime. He's the top name for me. And his film looked pretty good. He's got pretty good burst. He's a big guy. He looks a lot like Gus Edwards, actually. But he could be the 1A running back where there's no question about it and get more work from week to week than somebody like Gus Edwards. And obviously a lot younger than Gus Edwards. So that's somebody who I'm more interested in. Ricky Pearsall would be next for me. And then after that, Russell Wilson would be next. But obviously, if you need a wide receiver, if you need a quarterback, those are the guys that would make sense for you. If you don't need those guys and you just want to stockpile running backs, Jamie's list is not bad.
Let's play a quick game called Who Has More Catches? Who has more catches? Devon Achane in 5 games with Tua this year, or Gus Edwards in his entire career?
Achane.
Achane by 2, 33-31. All right, who has more? My phone's been blowing up. People are asking me on Twitter. I got a letter in the mail. When is Who Has More? It's in about a half hour. Sit tight. Before that, we got to tell you the quarterbacks and the running backs on waivers, the wide receivers and the tight ends, QBs and RBs when we come back on FFT. Welcome back, everybody. This is Fantasy Football Today, presented by BetMGM. Running backs and quarterbacks. It's pretty good this week. Love the quarterbacks available on waivers this week. And we're going to show you a list that doesn't even include guys like Aaron Rodgers and Matthew Stafford and maybe Justin Herbert. Justin Herbert I'm adding in one of my leagues, so I know you might have better options than this, but the top 2 guys are pretty darn good options here. So let's take a look as you're sitting there going, how am I going to replace Bryce Young and Daniel Jones? Well, here you go. Bo Nix, Russell Wilson, Jamie. these guys are top 12 for you this week?
They are. And you look at it and you could say, okay, maybe Wilson over Nix, as Dave alluded to, that's his favorite quarterback to add this week. I'm looking at it short term and long term. I think the matchups are fairly equal for both these guys this week. Nix gets the Falcons, Wilson gets the Ravens, and hopefully both take advantage of those scenarios. Nix has a better long-term schedule, though, when you look at who his upcoming opponents are compared to Wilson. So I like that a little bit better. I obviously like what Nix has done with his legs. He's getting more confident. I thought the game that he had in Week 10 against the Chiefs going into Kansas City, scoring 20 fantasy points, was huge. So I love the setup for what he has moving forward. And for me, I would take him slightly ahead of Russell Wilson. But if somebody wants to buy into Wilson over Nix, I totally get it. Wilson's been great in 2 of 3 starts for the Steelers. I just don't feel like it's a little sustainable. And I do think, like Dave alluded to on our podcast earlier today, the Steelers-Ravens rivalry typically produces a slugfest where it's a field goal fest and not exactly a pretty aesthetic game. We could see a situation where Russell Wilson has good numbers, just not great fantasy numbers. I think Nick's going to have great fantasy numbers against the Saints.
So it might
against Falcons.
Right. It might come down to when you need these quarterbacks as well. Obviously, Week 11, we like these guys as low-end starters. And Jamie's right. I do like Russell Wilson more. That Ravens pass defense just really hasn't passed the eyeball test. But look at Week 12. If you've got Josh Allen on your team, Joe Burrow on your team, Kirk Cousins on your team, maybe you're in a super flex league and you've got Derek Carr, or you're waiting for Trevor Lawrence to come back, those guys are all on bye. And so if these are the quarterbacks that are available to you now, they're not going to be available to you next week. You've got to go and pick them up now, carry them for the full week, carry them into Week 12, start them in Week 12. So that's only if you've got one of those quarterbacks. If you're good at quarterback, you can basically bypass this whole thing. But there are people that need quarterbacks, and I think that Russ and Nix make the most sense as the two to get.
Let's talk about 3 quarterbacks who had disappointing Week 10 performances. Aaron Rodgers got 4 fantasy points. Matthew Stafford and Tua. When you look at Bo Nix and Russell Wilson, would you start those guys over how many of those 3? Aaron Rodgers, Matthew Stafford, Tua Tagovailoa.
All 3 this week.
It's all 3. Stafford's the only one that I could potentially put ahead of both of them, just because I figure the matchup against New England is going to be favorable for him, and I think his offensive line will be better. And to Jamie's point earlier, when you talk about the Raiders and any offense taking on the Raiders, usually they put up some good numbers. That could mean that Tua Tagovailoa does have 3 touchdown upside. It's just a matter of whether or not he gets there and how many yards he gets along with it.
How do you feel about Jameis Winston this week, Dave?
I feel okay. I don't mind the matchup against New Orleans, but with the Browns coming off of a bye, I almost wonder if this is where Nick Chubb gets right. That offensive line will be healthy. The Saints defense, I still don't think they're that good either against the run or the pass. And I kind of see Nick Chubb getting a pretty big workload and having a good game. So if he's getting a lot of work, that means Jameis Winston isn't throwing a ton. I think Winston's okay. I just don't know if he's got that upside that the other quarterbacks that we talked about have. And we know he's got more downside than those other quarterbacks too. So he's behind Stafford and Tua for me as an example.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I do think you gave a good number on our podcast this morning, Adam, of 18 fantasy points. I think that's kind of exactly where he'll be. I'd take slightly north of that, 19, 20 points. But hopefully we get a good performance from Jameis Winston taking on his former team, and I think we get a good game from Nick Chubb and Jameis Winston as well.
I didn't say 18 fantasy points. I said 18 interceptions.
That would be a little bit too much.
One of you took the over on that, I believe.
Man, I'm glad we got the Adam Mazer stand-up hour today.
Yeah. So don't be afraid to take a look at Drake May. Drake May is through with the of his schedule. He runs, he avoids sacks. He's a good player. But quarterback is pretty deep this year, even with 4 guys on a bye this week. And then you've got, if you're in the super flex leagues, Will Levis might be available in a 10-team league, but we don't know who. Right now it's Cooper Rush, but it could end up being Trey Lance for the Cowboys. Mac Jones could have the job for the rest of the season. Desmond Ridder could have the job for the Raiders, and the Giants could be making a quarterback change as well, though we don't know if it would be. I would guess Drew Lock, maybe Tommy DeVito. All right, over to the running backs. Dave, you took some time before the show to watch some tape on Audric Estime, and where did you come out on him?
I thought he looked mostly good against Kansas City. We're talking about a physical running back, a big guy who's got some good burst, good speed. The vision isn't great, and that kind of bothers me a little bit. That's something that I wish he could get better at. But what he's got is an opportunity to be that lead running back for Denver. And in a tough matchup against Kansas City, I don't think he did anything to lose that opportunity to move forward as Denver's lead running back. He also was a willing pass protector, didn't run many routes, definitely didn't get any targets. The passing game is something he is going to fall short in by comparison to all the other running backs across the National Football League. But I think when we're talking about a young running back getting an opportunity with a competitive offense, this is the type of player I would love to have on my team. And the fact that he's just now coming into his own in the double-digit weeks of the fantasy season means that he's got a chance to help fantasy managers, maybe more so non and half PPR leagues, as a low-end number 2 running back.
Jamie, Gus Edwards, how much of a difference is there between Gus and Estime? Because I revealed at the top of the show or last segment, I put a pretty big fab bid in for Audric Estime. I'm not going to do that for Gus Edwards. So do you see it the same way?
So we talked about this Sunday night when comparing these two running backs. And the question I think I asked you guys was, if there's an injury in the backfield to both these teams, who's got the most upside? And we all settled on it was Gus Edwards because if Dobbins misses time.
For sure.
Edwards is a must-start guy, whereas Estime is playing ahead of Javonte Williams, who did nothing in the game against the Chiefs, and Jaleel McLaughlin basically did nothing in the game against the Chiefs. He's obviously would get more playing time if those guys aren't there, but I don't think things dramatically change for him based on where he's headed trajectory-wise. So if you're looking long-term, they profile the same way. Edwards has 1 catch on the season, and he missed 4 games. Estime has no targets on the season, and he didn't really get going until the last couple of weeks. So they're not going to help you unless they're getting carries inside the 5, finding the end zone, or having multiple games of 100-yard rushing. And I don't think that's going to happen for Estime right now. It could happen for Gus if Dobbins isn't there. So long-term, Edwards might make more sense. Short-term, though, Estime makes more sense. It just depends on what you need.
And I thought Gus Edwards actually looked good in his first game back. And again, he missed a lot of time, fresh legs. We know he's a much older running back than Audric Estime. But combine that with the offensive line that the Chargers have, and it's a good setup. The problem is 10 carries on 15 snaps. Is there a pathway to him playing 50% of the snaps, 60% of the snaps for the Chargers? Doesn't even matter if he does. Or our team's just going to learn that whenever Gus Edwards is on the field, this is probably when the Chargers are going to run the football. And J.K. Dobbins is no slouch. We could see J.K. Dobbins come out next week and have a monster game, and Gus Edwards is playing 15 snaps and only getting 5 carries. So I'm a little bit more nervous about the long-term outlook for Gus Edwards. But for one game, one matchup, he looked pretty good.
So just to last thing on Estime, because you may not be blown away by 14 carries for 53 yards, 3.79 yards per carry. 8 running backs have had 11 or more carries against the Chiefs, and only Jordan Mason averaged more yards per carry than Audric Estime. Mm-hmm. So it actually was a pretty good performance. Like Derrick Henry didn't even average 3.8 yards per carry against the Chiefs on basically the same amount of carries.
And if I may, a number of his carries came at the end of the game when they were just grinding down the clock so that they could kick a field goal. So it's not like Estime was trying to run through big gaps. He's just basically jamming himself between his offensive linemen, getting a yard or 2 at a time. I bet his rushing average was much better before the last drive of the game.
And then you've got Cam Akers. So, Jamie, how are we approaching this Minnesota situation?
I think if you're looking at it, who has the most upside to help me for this week, I would be looking at Akers, because Estime may have a good game in Week 11. Edwards may have a good game in Week 11. If Akers is starting against the Titans, he's going to be a top 24 running back. And so Aaron Jones is obviously dealing with a rib injury that's a pain tolerance thing. He's not going to practice. You're not going to know. So you may pick up Akers and drop him by the end of the week. You may pick up Akers and hold him just to see how long the situation lingers for Aaron Jones. He's given us now 2 scares. Once in London, had a bye week, came back and played. We thought he was going to be out for multiple weeks with a hip injury. Now he's dealing with a rib injury that looked very painful, obviously. Came back in that same game. So Aaron Jones is doing great things this season. But Akers has shown that he could be a flex option in a starting role when he was in Houston. He lost that job quickly because Dario Gumbolale was better for that team in a passing downs role. I don't think we're going to see that from Ty Chandler, who's disappointed the Vikings, which is why they went out and got Cam Akers. So I would want to roster him. I'm not going to go crazy with fab, but it might be the most important fab you spend, because if he gets that starting job against the Titans, he could be a starting running back for your fantasy team.
It goes triple if you've got Aaron Jones on your team. If you're relying on Aaron Jones as one of your starting running backs, you can spend 5-6% of your fab. That's not that much just to lock up that Vikings backfield.
Yeah, I don't know that you're going to get him with that. I saw some pretty aggressive fab bids on Akers last week, which really surprised me. Now it looks smart, but you might have to go a little bit higher than that. Okay, we're going to take a break. We got wide receivers and tight ends. The number one tight end to get off waivers is someone that you might not expect. We'll tell you after this on Fantasy Football Today. Let's take a look at the wide receivers and tight ends to grab off the waiver wire for Week 11. This is Fantasy Football Today, presented by BetMGM. So, Jamie, you got a couple of Colts at the top of the list. These are players rostered in fewer than 65% of leagues. Alec Pierce and Adonai Mitchell. I know you like to group guys that are teammates, so I don't know that Mitchell would actually be second. No. But do you care at all about the matchup against the Jets? I think they still are first, or something like close to first in points allowed to wide receivers. Is it still a tough matchup?
Not at all. Not with how much Joe Flacco will throw. Same thing for the Browns guys with how much Jameis Winston will throw. These guys are getting so much volume that it's worth buying into them, because I think what we're going to see is the Colts will run the ball on the Jets. Jonathan Taylor has numbers, but Flacco's still probably throwing the ball 35 plus times, and they're concentrated targets. You're looking at Josh Downs, 9 plus targets. You're looking at Pierce, and obviously for the Colts guys, it's contingent on Michael Pittman. If Michael Pittman plays, you're not even bothering with Alec Pierce or Adonai Mitchell. And certainly if Anthony Richardson comes in the future, you're not bothering with any of these guys with how poorly he's thrown the ball to his receivers. But Flacco's giving these guys chances to win. And you saw that in the game without Pittman against Buffalo, which is a very good defense as well. You saw Pierce with 7 targets. He catches the touchdown, 4 catches, 81 yards. And then you saw with Mitchell, caught all 6 of his targets for 81 yards. These guys are going to get chances to win against the Jets defense that I think is extremely overrated right now. So as long as Flacco is not a punching bag and takes just has a game where he's abused like C.J. Stroud was 2 games ago when the Jets defense actually showed up, then I think Flacco will give these guys opportunities to make plays. But it's totally contingent on Michael Pittman's injury status. If Pittman plays, ignore the Colts guys and go straight to Jerry Jeudy as number 1 receiver to add.
Yeah, so actually the Colts kind of sound like the Browns, right? Where you've got guys getting a bunch of targets, they're dropping back, they're throwing a lot. Dave, how would you compare the Colts situation to the Browns situation? Where I know we'll just go without, well, it doesn't go without saying, it goes with saying Cedric Tillman. If Cedric Tillman is available, make him your number 1 priority, and he's about 78% rostered in CBS Sports leagues. But Dave, compare the Browns and the Colts.
There are way more pitfalls with the Colts receivers not named Josh Downs than there are with the Browns receivers not named Elijah Moore. And I know that sounded a little wonky. Let me explain it for you. Jamie laid it out. If Michael Pittman's back, that's going to hurt Alec Pierce and Adonai Mitchell. When Anthony Richardson comes back, and note that I said when Anthony Richardson comes back, it's going to make mush of all the upside for all the receivers not named Josh Downs in Indianapolis. We know what the situation is in Cleveland rest of season. It's Jameis Winston under center. Hopefully they don't move him out for Dorian Thompson-Robinson. Cedric Tillman looks like he's going to be the number 1 guy. And I know it's gross to trust Jerry Jeudy, but he's given you PPR points in the range of 12 to 14 each of his last 2 games. So there might be more staying power with Jerry Jeudy. All that being said, I look at all these wide receivers as bench options for now. In the event that Flacco starts, Pittman's out, weather's okay for the matchup against the Jets, then yes, Pierce and Mitchell would make sense to pull off the bench and use as bye week replacements as wide receiver. But I do think Jeudy also qualifies as a bye week replacement because of his role in the slot. Or he's not just a slot receiver, he lines up all across the formation, but because he gets decent target volume from game to game. Not a ton of upside, and you know the downside, but it's the same exact type of downside that the Colts wide receivers have.
I'm trying to think of the wide receiver that we should use for, would you start these guys over? Because I was going to say Jalen Waddle, but I think at this point I'd start most of them over Waddle. And I don't think we'll go as far as Tyreek Hill, and I don't know if we're going to go as far as CeeDee Lamb. But let's take a guy like Jameson Williams. We really don't know what to expect on a week-to-week basis. So if Michael Pittman were out, would you start Alec Pierce and or Adonai Mitchell over Jameson Williams?
Pierce, yes. Mitchell, no.
I might say yes to both, especially if it's full PPR, Adam, because we know that there's just so much fluctuation with Jameson Williams, and we know the targets aren't there for him. But if it's the perfect situation that I just described, yeah, give me the Colts guys over Jameson Williams.
Yeah, I actually like Williams this week. Jags give up a lot of big plays down the field, and if Laporta does not play, Williams may get a little bit more opportunities. Plus, you also have Jared Goff coming off a 5-interception game where he may try, or at least Dan Campbell may try to get him an opportunity back in the MVP race. So I think we could see Jared Goff throwing a little bit more this week.
Okay, how about Jerry Jeudy or Jameson Williams or Elijah Moore?
Jeudy and PPR. I mean, he's just been so consistent.
So that's interesting to me that you would say Jeudy over Jameson Williams in PPR, but not the Colts wide receivers in PPR, because the Colts wide receivers, at least based on last week, got a lot of targets. I put Jeudy in the exact same boat as the Colts wide receivers. I would start him over Jameson Williams, Elijah Moore even in full PPR. I'll take my chances with Jameson Williams.
Dave, what is it that you like about Ricky Pearsall?
Well, comparing him to all these other wideouts that we've talked about, here's somebody who's playing in a good offense with a really good quarterback. He's got as many targets, at least last week, as Deebo Samuel had, and he proved to be a good playmaker down the field. And I know that Christian McCaffrey is ultimately going to have some games where he just dominates touches and yardage and touchdowns and all that for the 49ers. But Pearsall looks good, and as a number 3 receiver who could evolve into their number 2 wide receiver in San Francisco, he's probably my favorite guy to get with an eye toward rest of season. I don't have to worry about who's playing quarterback. I don't have to worry about somebody who's on the Cleveland Browns. This is a good offense, and he's a good young player who I think is going to continue to have good opportunities from week to week.
I hope you're right, but he had a 46-yard touchdown catch against Tampa Bay, and we know everybody beats up on Tampa Bay. You take away that play, and it's 3 for 30 some odd receiving yards in an offense where we know they're going to give the other guys a few more chances typically on a week-to-week basis. So I don't want to chase what he just did against Tampa Bay. That being said, he's 3 games into his NFL career after being shot in September. So what he's doing is nothing short of amazing. Yeah. They gave him a big carry in the game prior to the bye, so he did well in an end around there. So I like that they're trying to manufacture touches for Ricky Pearsall, but just don't chase the one big play that he had against Tampa Bay where he actually stepped out of bounds and didn't score a touchdown.
Let's transition to... You really think that? Because I didn't think he did.
I don't think he did either.
Well, replay showed it.
Let's take another look. All right, let's take a look at the tight ends here because, look, no Cade Otton and no Trey McBride. So this is serious stuff here. And no Dalton Kincaid. Well, actually, we don't know that. I feel like Kincaid probably won't play, but we don't know that. But Dawson Knox being number 1. All right, Jamie... Come on, man. Dalton Kincaid's been one of the biggest busts all season. Now his backup's going to come in and be good? What are you talking about, dude?
It's totally taking a flyer on a situation more so than the player. And we know Dawson Knox has had a good, career with Josh Allen finding the end zone, at least before Dalton Kincaid came along last year. So you're looking at 3 things that play for him for this week. You got the first thing, which is Dalton Kincaid may not play with the knee injury. So that gives Knox the opportunity for a few more targets. Then you have the receivers that are banged up for Buffalo with Amari Cooper and Keon Coleman both dealing with wrist injuries. Coleman's already been ruled out. We don't know if Cooper's going to play. He hasn't played the last 2 weeks. Then you have the matchup. Chiefs allow the most fantasy points allowed to opposing tight ends. So you have opportunity, you have matchup, and you have hopefully a chance here to maybe have his best game of the season. They go into their bye next week, so they'll probably be a little bit cautious with Kincaid, knowing that they need him for the stretch run. They're going to win the AFC East and be one of the best teams in the AFC. So I doubt they want to have him injured. So I would not be surprised if Dawson Knox plays, not be surprised if he takes advantage of this matchup. You got to be cautious about who you're starting him over. That's the biggest question. And you don't want to drop a tight end of significance just to pick up Dawson Knox for a 1-week situation. But if you are stuck without McBride, without Otton, maybe without Kincaid, maybe without Laporta, you could be looking at Dawson Knox as a good bye-week replacement.
There's one other thing, Adam. Did you see the list of the other tight ends that Jamie recommended? You've got Dawson Knox, and then there's Pat Freiermuth. He's got a good matchup too. But then everybody else on that list, I don't think people are going to make a beeline for them off the waiver wire. So you can go and get Knox now. And even if Kincaid ends up playing, you're dropping Knox, and you can go to your waiver wire and pick up one of those other stiffs.
Okay. And those other stiffs would be Jonnu Smith, Davis Allen, who is clearly just the starting tight end now, running a bunch of routes, got 6 targets for the Rams yesterday. Brock Wright filling in for Sam Laporta potentially. They're hopeful Laporta can play. And then not for this week, but Jatavion Sanders is coming on strong lately. Only had 2 targets, but he caught a touchdown against the Giants. But 9.9 or more PPR fantasy points in 3 of his last 5 games, and then he had the touchdown. But then he's got a great schedule coming out of the bye. So just some other options for you at tight end.
And
All right,
you guys brought up on the podcast, I added him to the column, Will Dissly. Got to give him credit for 18 pass attempts for Justin Herbert in the game against the Titans, and he had 6 targets. So clearly he was a focal point of the offense there. So Will Dissly should be on the list as well.
Good for you for not dissing Dissly.
I have 2 bold predictions for the football games this weekend. Ready? Ravens by 15.
Ooh.
And in a new round of how are the insanely lucky Chiefs going to win this week, Tyler Bass misses a 38-yard field goal, and the Chiefs win by 1 point.
So back-to-back field goal situations.
Yeah. Which is more likely, you think? Ravens by 15 or Tyler Bass misses walk-off 38-yard field goal?
Ravens by 15.
Tyler Bass missing the field goal.
All right, let's go to break. Who has more lucky wins this season? Who has more is coming up next on Fantasy Football Today. Ooh, welcome back to Fantasy Football Today, presented by BetMGM. We have an animation now, and it is time for America's 12th favorite fantasy football game show. It is time for Who Has More, climbing up in the rankings. Yeah. Here's how the game works. I speak, then Dave and Jamie speak, then we all speak, and we have fun. Here we go. Who has more PPR points per game? Christian McCaffrey or Kareem Hunt?
I think it's Kareem Hunt.
McCaffrey had 16.5. I'll take McCaffrey.
Okay, the answer is Kareem Hunt by 1/10 of a point. And I was going to see who had more catches, but it's Kareem Hunt. He had 7 last week. All right, so Kareem Hunt 1 point ahead of Christian McCaffrey. Who would you rather have? No, I know you're going to rather have rest of season.
Yeah.
But
There's a discussion to be had here, Adam, because Isaiah Pacheco, it looks like the window is opening for him to return, which means that Kareem Hunt's fantasy value could go the same way that Jordan Mason's fantasy value went. He's going to end up being a backup. If you've got Kareem Hunt, you're not going to get nearly as much from him in trade now as you would have a week ago, 2 weeks ago. But we don't know when Pacheco exactly will come back, so you still can squeeze out a couple of starts from Kareem Hunt. And if you're a fantasy manager that needs a running back just to get you through the next couple of weeks, you should expect to give up next to nothing to get Kareem Hunt on your fantasy team.
Who has more rushing touchdowns? This one inspired by Jamie Eisenberg from this morning's podcast episode. Who has more rushing touchdowns, the Broncos running backs or Devon Achane?
I think it's Achane.
I think it's the Broncos running backs.
It is the Broncos running backs.
Was it 3-2?
3-2. Achane has
He's
2.
caught a couple, but he hasn't run.
Right. I figured he might have had 4 on the year, not 3.
Well, you were wrong.
Very.
And he only has 2. The Broncos running backs have 3. Okay, we're tied at 1. Who has more games with 19 or more PPR fantasy points? Ramondre Stevenson or Jahmyr Gibbs?
I think Ramondre has 2.
The knee-jerk reaction, the answer is Gibbs, but the fact that you're asking that makes me think that it's actually Stevenson.
I'm going to say
It has
Stevenson.
to be. Why else would I ask?
I'm going to say Stevenson as well. I think you're playing games on it.
Good for you, Jack. 4 for Stevenson. He's done it 4 times this year.
Yeah, not
and
bad.
Jahmyr Gibbs at 3 times. So starter sit Ramondre against the Rams.
He's a starter, number 2 running back.
Yeah, especially with all these teams on bye, 4 teams on bye. He's absolutely going to make the top 24.
Okay. Who has more fantasy points per game? Jaden Daniels in his 9 healthy games, removing the Carolina game. Jaden Daniels in his 9 healthy games, or Brock Purdy, 6-point per passing touchdown leagues.
Oh, it's going to be close between those two. Purdy's been hot lately. Daniels was hot earlier this year.
I'll say Daniels.
I'll say Purdy just to be different.
I appreciate that, Dave, but you are just being wrong. It is Jaden Daniels. It's not that close. It's 22.6 to 21.4, but when I say that Jaden Daniels in his 9 healthy games has only averaged 22.6 PPR or 6-point per passing touchdown league fantasy points, does that kind of surprise you? Doesn't that feel a little low?
Yes, it does seem like he's had bigger games and should have a higher point per game number.
When's the last time he had a monster game rushing? I feel like we've been that's been taken away from us, and we need to get that back. Maybe Thursday is the time it happens against Philly.
Well, I don't want to tell you this because it's going to... Well, no, it's okay. I'll throw it in there. He hasn't scored a rushing touchdown in 6 weeks.
Right. So, when's the last time he had even 40 rushing yards in a game? I mean, for all I know, it could have been 2 weeks ago. But
that was 2 weeks. 3 weeks ago.
Okay.
He had 50, 52, 35, and 5 in his last 4 games.
Okay.
All right. Next up, who has more points per game? The New York Giants offense.
Nope.
Not fantasy, just the New York Giants offense, or Juwan Jennings in PPR?
Jennings.
Man, that's so bad. I'll say the Giants.
It is the Giants. Jamie is pulling away. I think he's up by 2 here.
You just wanted to say that so the Giants finally won at something.
Yeah.
And this is where
Giants
they win, is they beat Juwan Jennings in fantasy points.
The Giants are averaging 15 points per game offensively. Juwan Jennings is averaging 14.2.
I got to know, Dave.
Yeah.
He's sitting around. He's doing his notes for the show. And he's like, I'm going to do something with the Giants. And he said, the Giants points per game. Who randomly can I compare the Giants points per game to? Juwan Jennings.
Well, he's a very relevant player. Who would you rather have rest of season if I gave you Juwan Jennings in PPR or what the New York Giants were going to score on offense?
The Giants.
Yeah, I mean, that includes Malik Neighbors, right? And Tyrone Tracy.
No. It's not their fantasy points. It's the amount of points that the Giants score.
You're creating a made-up, part of fantasy
You're basically saying, can Juwan Jennings score more than 15 points per game weekly?
Yes. Okay, or can the Giants do it? I don't know that they can.
Not if they're going to start changing quarterbacks and messing around. I don't know if they can. I think Jennings can average close to 15 fantasy points per game in PPR.
All right, Dave, you got to get serious here, man. You're getting your butt kicked. It's embarrassing. It's embarrassing for everyone.
I feel embarrassed.
On the day of the animation, too.
Yeah, I know, right? Who has more targets since the Jets acquired Devontae Adams? Devontae Adams or Jamar Chase?
I think it's Adams.
So it's 4 games, right? I'll say Chase.
Jamie is crushing it. I think Jamie just clinched.
Well,
it's
3 of those
Chase
games
45
without T. Higgins.
39. Yeah. Also, but I did want to point out Chase is number 1 in targets over the last 4 games. Adams is 4th, I believe, at 39. Still getting a lot of targets. Who has more rushing touchdowns in their last 3 games? Jalen Hurts or Josh Allen, Jaden Daniels, Lamar Jackson, and Kyler Murray combined?
Jalen Hurts.
I'll take the other guys combined.
It's Jalen Hurts, and it's not even close.
Yeah, he's been a monster.
6'3".
I have to answer something different. I'm getting my clock clean.
Yeah, you did.
Yeah.
I get that. No, but that's crazy that Allen, Daniels, Jackson, and Murray have combined for 3 rushing touchdowns in the last 3 games.
And that's 2 from Allen, right?
Yeah, or 2 from Allen, 1 from Murray, or the vice versa, whatever.
Oh, you're right. No, 2 from Murray, 1 from Allen.
All right, last one. And then I have a bonus one if we have time. But last one. Who has more teeth, a shark or a snail?
A shark.
Everyone knows it's a snail. Duh.
It is a snail. Did you know snails have more teeth than any other animal? They have over 25,000 teeth.
I feel like Adam would be the football player that went on IR for getting bit by a snail and couldn't run the following week.
Snail toe. Hey, how many points was that last question worth, Adam?
25,000, 1 for each tooth.
Excellent. I've taken the lead.
I've been told I have to wrap. I had a great bonus one, but I'll save it for the podcast tomorrow. When we come back, we'll read your tweets.
Do it early in the show when I'm not there.
He's going to be late. We'll read your questions after this on FFT. Back with your tweet. Should I drop Madison for Estime?
Oh, man. Let me think about it. Yeah, I think I would.
I would not.
I would. And that's it for fantasy football today. Sorry we didn't have time for more. We got another episode tomorrow at 1 p.m. Check out our podcast. For Dave and Jamie, I'm Adam. Thanks for watching and have a good one, everybody.